I'd already signed it in the proper place, period, and it's only when I saw a reminder to sign it that I clicked it open thinking it was a new request, period. That's when I saw how the signatures were all in the wrong place.
I look forward to sharing with you here. Let's see if I can get everything working here. So I made a slight adjustment to the title, but basically the same thing. So this summer, I was asked by Nancy LaCourte at PUC to do a presentation on The Chosen, or she asked if I'd be interested in doing a presentation on The Chosen for a Zoom Sabbath school that she runs. And I thought about it. I had watched the first two seasons with my wife a few years back. I hadn't seen seasons 3 and 4, but I thought, yeah, that would be kind of fun to do. I like analyzing the way stories are told and adaptations, and I liked what I had seen of seasons 1 and 2 of The Chosen. So I decided to jump into that. And then it just so happened with the timing of it that I I was, we have the people that run the Bible Camporee, the Pathfinder Camporee, attend our church, Ron Whitehead and Betty Whitehead, or who are at least leaders in it. And Betty Whitehead is like one of the people in charge of the biblical dramatization that they do. And so I started looking at that and I thought, oh, that's really interesting too. So I'll talk about both of these adaptations of biblical narratives and how they do it, what's interesting about some features of them and so forth. So that's how I came to have this talk. I thought it would be a good run through and draft for the Sabbath School presentation I'm going to do later. And you know how it is. We all in the English field believe in revision and trying rough drafts. So you're getting my rough draft right now. And I thank you for any feedback you give me on it. All right. So adaptation of the kind that I'm talking about is a creative work that's based on a previous source. In this case, the text of the Bible is the source of the adaptation. Biblical adaptation has a long history. There are epic poems like Paradise Lost, novels like Ben-Hur. Desire of Ages could be considered an adaptation in that it's biblically based life of Christ, but also adds a number of bits to the narrative that are not actually in the Bible. The Robe, Joseph, our own Adventist novelist, Terry Fivesh, has written a number of novels, and Joseph's just one of them. I've read several novels by Francine Rivers, well-known Christian author. Sons of Encouragement is one of those. So those are just samples of books. Feature films have a long history doing biblical adaptations. They were big spectacle things done in the late 40s, early 50s through the 60s. And we've come back to some of those in more recent times. There's a list of some of those there. There's many others. There have been TV series and shows, including The Chosen. A lot of Adventists have experience with Veggie Tales, which is, you could definitely do a whole paper on Veggie Tales and the adaptation methods and protocols that they do also. There's lots of theater productions. The first one is like a serious drama, and then there's musical-oriented theater productions, which I listed below that. Since Believe the Promise is a musical theater production, I listed especially musical productions there. Then I think it's interesting we can expand our thinking about other biblically based adaptations. Nathan Green, the well-known Adventist painter, is also a resident in Berrien County. And he's done a lot of biblically based paintings, including a series about the 6 days of creation. I would have put a copy of one of his paintings up there, but I didn't want to deal with potential infringement issues there. But it's interesting to see how he adapts ideas about the 6th day of creation. For instance, there's all like African animals surrounding or animals that we would expect from the continent of Africa in the 6th day painting. It's interesting to look at the way the painting positions Adam being created by God in that particular moment. and the way the animals are formed around it. It is an artistic production. Stained glass windows that correspond to biblical narratives are another way of adapting the Bible story. The church that my in-laws attended for many years, the Yucaipa Spanish church, put in a series of stained glass windows on gospel narratives in the last couple of years there. There's action Bible games. There's nativity scenes that people put up everywhere. There's the Ark encounter not too far from here, which we could consider a biblical adaptation. And I just noticed on Spectrum last week a manga version of The Great Controversy. So there's all kinds of ways that the Bible can be adapted. The two productions that I'm looking at are just a couple of examples. And I think it's always interesting when you have a reference work and a work that's based on that, and to look at what's similar, different about them, and how they work. Today's focused adaptations of The Chosen. It's a TV miniseries that's began being shown in 2017. I think they had some COVID interruptions because they've had 4 seasons so far, 8 episodes per season. And then Believe the Promise was just performed here in August of 2024. It's at Adventist Camporee Musical Theater. It's 5 acts of, I have some words under there, but I can't see it because of all the faces I have on the side, of about 50 minutes each, I think is what I had down there. So there's different questions that we could ask about biblical adaptations, many questions, and I just have a few that I'm going to be asking and discussing here. Is there a good reason to make adaptations? Should we just focus instead on the original biblical text? What makes an adaptation good or bad? What are some interesting features of these focus adaptations, and what could be some general guidelines or protocols for biblical adaptations from a faith-based perspective? So we'll start with this first question. Is there a good reason to make adaptations? Well, the original Bible text itself is an adaptation in that it is a selective verbal representation of real historical events. And, we have 4 different gospels that were made out of the life of Christ. So each of them is adapting the life of Christ into a written form. There's an interesting quote near the end of John that you're familiar with, I'm sure. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them was written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. So I think it's important to realize that the original Bible is an adaptation, if you want to call it that in a broader sense of the word, from actual historical events. And in addition to that, as soon as we start reading a text, I'm not saying anything new to English professors, but the text is in order to read it, we have to adapt the text to our own imaginative realization of it. In other words, it's impossible to read a text without adapting it. If I read the story of the rich man and Lazarus, the way I conceive of their relationship to each other that takes place in my mind is partly a creation of my subjective self. And that's also true of any other story that we read. We have to construe it ourselves so that we're already participating in an adaptation of the original text just in order to read it. At the same time, I do believe we should be clear about what's in the original text and what is an adaptation that goes beyond the original text, especially in the case of a sacred text, or the sacred text for us, the Bible. It's a sacred reference point for any adaptation. And I'll say more about that in guidelines at the end. So as far as, is there a good reason to make adaptations? I would say here's a few reasons. Just give me a second here to make an adjustment in this side screen. Adaptations offer the opportunity to think about the meaning of the original text and to engage in it with it in a different way. If any of you have ever tried to write an adaptation yourself, you know how it makes you pay super close attention to all the features of the original, because you're thinking very carefully about what you're going to do with that. And both for the people who wrote and produced and acted in this adaptation, and for those of us who have watched either of The Chosen or Believe the Promise, I think it definitely helps us to think quite a bit more about the original text and from a different perspective. Because it's not the original text, it gives us a vantage point from which to view the original text that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's an interesting feature that James Joyce was not able to write about Dublin while he was in Dublin. It's when he went to the continent that he was able to write more clearly about Dublin when he was somewhere else and had a different place to view it from. And I think adaptations give us a chance to think about, well, what really is in the original and what's the meaning of the original. Adaptations can also engage us emotionally and intellectually. It can attract new readers to the text who might not choose the text or the, text in the broad sense. It could be a film or a theater production in this case, who might not choose to direct engagement with the text as a first step. Also, it's important for us to keep meditating on the text and make it a living document for our generation. And that's adaptations can contribute to that. So I think that's an important aspect of making adaptations and a value of them. So speaking about the adaptation of The Chosen, I really like how Jesus is portrayed. Jonathan Rumi, I believe is the name of the actor who's playing Jesus. He looks a little like Werner Sallman's Christ. I can't remember the name of the painter or the famous one. I think that's his name. But he does a really good job, I think, with portraying Jesus. And to see Jesus fleshed out, even if that's not exactly what Jesus looked like, and I'm sure it's not, I don't know, it's helpful to us as human beings to see that, not to make an image or a God out of Jonathan Rumi, but I think to see it, to help us imagine more carefully what Jesus was actually like, seeing him portrayed helps us to question what is our image that we've had previously of Jesus, and how does this image of this person comport to our previous understanding and to what the biblical text would lead us to think. I think in general, the disciples are well cast and presented. The women are well presented in the text. You have continuing roles of Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Rama, an invented character, Tamar, an invented character. There are other women who are following Jesus that are referred to in the text, but they're not specified. So these could be, you could say that they are actually in the original text, but they're just not identified as particular individuals. In the same way, Peter is mentioned as having a mother-in-law. There's no talk in the Bible about Peter's wife, but The Chosen supplies a specific person to be a wife for Peter, which is implied by the text. Give her a name, Eden. She's an important character in several episodes. She and Peter have a miscarriage, which is not talked about in the Bible, but adds an interesting element to the drama and how Jesus relates to women within the text. I would say the writing and the production value is very high in The Chosen. They've raised a lot of money, I guess, with their independent marketing for it. And of course, now it's on Amazon Prime. They have a lot of beautiful outdoor shots. They have good sets. They have lighting that's interesting. They have interesting background music. I would just say it's in general a high quality production. And the writing is really good. We'll get more into that when I talk about a specific episode here in a minute. I would say for myself, personally, as a viewer of this season's, it's definitely increased my appreciation for the gospel accounts and for the nature of Jesus as simultaneously God and man, several other issues I could mention. I consider it a faith-enhancing experience to watch it for me. Like C.S. Lewis and other people have mentioned in the past, these works don't exist objectively apart by themselves. They always exist in coordination with a reader's or viewer's response to them. Different people might have different responses. Some people might be blessed especially by one thing in it. Others might be offended by something in it. So I'm telling you, for me, I really appreciated the presentation in The Chosen. So I did a whole study of an episode in season 1 about the woman at the well of Jacob's well in Samaria, woman from the city of Sychar. But I decided for this presentation to focus on episode 7 of season 4, The Last Sign. It includes the resurrection of Lazarus, which will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck if you watch it. I thought that was a super interesting episode, and I've spent, several hours studying it, writing it up, analyzing it in different ways. And I'll share with you just one aspect of that analysis this evening. So 73 minutes long, based on John 11. That's the only gospel that tells that story, which is interesting considering it's such an amazing story. So here's some elements that I would consider added to the adaptation that are not, at least on the surface of the biblical version. I got a much greater sense of Jesus's sorrow through the whole episode for his disciples' slow understanding, their lack of faith, the sorrow of Mary and Martha, the interactions within the disciples. There's some very interesting dynamics that are playing out between the different disciples. And I'm going to particularly focus on the whole story of Thomas and Rama. Rama is an invented character who first appears in season 1. I think it might be episode 3, or maybe it's episode 5. I have it in notes, but I wasn't able to print out those notes. I have a new computer, and it's not connected to the printer correctly here at Andrews. So I'm going off my head on that. But anyway, Thomas and Rama, Thomas is obviously one of the disciples, a biblical character, and Rama is a woman who also decides to become a disciple of Jesus and is first introduced. She and Thomas are catering for the wedding and the wedding at Cana. And Thomas is supplying the food and Rama is supplying the wine. And so they first have a working relationship, and then over a number of interactions through the episodes, they fall in love and they get engaged at the beginning of season 4. So this is something that's carefully paced and placed out over a number of episodes, and over a number of seasons, in fact. And then, shockingly, Rama gets, right after they get engaged, later in the season, I think it's episode 5. Again, that's in my notes that I wasn't able to print. Rama is killed. There's a street disturbance with people getting riled up by Jesus's preaching. A Roman praetor steps in and is swinging his sword around and accidentally runs it through Rama. And it's a crushing blow to Jesus's band in general and to Thomas in particular, who was engaged to her. And the understanding was that Jesus was going to stand in for the father of the bride when they got married, because Rama's father didn't approve of her marrying Thomas. So this is an invented story that has quite a bit of texture to it. And what is particularly interesting to me in context of this presentation is how the after effects of Rama's death and its effect on Thomas's psychology, principally, but also to the other disciples, is woven through the story. So moving on from there, when I have in the past read the story of the resurrection of Lazarus, I've kind of seen it as an all positive story. Jesus, Lazarus is dead. Jesus brings his disciples over to Bethany after Lazarus has died. I mean, sure, Mary and Martha are really sad, but then big deal because Jesus is going to resurrect Lazarus. He does. And everybody's happy and yada, yada is kind of the way I had traditionally read that story. But The Chosen, I think, does a very good job of showing a bunch of down elements in connection with what I'm calling up elements, these positive elements about the story that give it a very muted or mixed tone and a lot of nuance that I think is actually now in the Bible that I was kind of overlooking before. And let me talk about that for a minute. Okay, little James, one of the disciples, they call them Big James and Little James. Big James is John the disciple's brother, and Little James is another disciple, shorter, obviously. Little James has had a big hip problem. He always walks with a staff. Sometimes his pain is really bad, sometimes it's not so bad. But through this whole episode, little James having this terrible pain. Furthermore, Jesus is experiencing a sense of, maybe doom isn't the best word, which I wrote up there. Let's say foreboding or something, because he knows that his time on earth is short. This is the last miracle that he's going to publicly perform before his death. And the episode title is The Last Sign, if I'm remembering correctly. So Jesus's sense of foreboding and that he's going to be done with his earthly ministry, and the disciples still haven't really grasped what they need to grasp about having faith in him and being able to take disappointment or challenge because of their trust in him. And in particular, Thomas's disillusionment is woven through this whole episode. I made a whole chart about this. There's 25 different times that there's a shot of Thomas. And, in this scene, I won't go through that whole business. I'll just hit a couple of highlights of it. But Thomas's post-Rama's death trauma is weighing very heavily on him. And in every shot that he's shown in this episode, you see that being portrayed. So, yeah. And it dramatizes the problem of suffering. If Jesus has the power to resurrect Lazarus, why does Rama die? Why does John the Baptist die? Why does little James suffer from his terrible pains? Why does Jesus go to the cross? In a word, why do any of us suffer if God has the power to make us whole? Okay, different philosophers and theologians have wrestled with this question of the problem of human suffering for a long time. And this episode doesn't answer these questions, but it helps us to experience these questions at a deep level. And I think a deeper experience can help build trust, even in the lack of a definitive answer to human suffering. So, again, wow, I have a bunch of notes, but I can't see them. So I'm going to tell you what I, believe I was writing in those notes. So during this episode of the resurrection of Lazarus, there are many shots that show Thomas. That's Thomas there. And this particular shot is after Lazarus has come out of the tomb and Jesus is on the right-hand side and Lazarus is on the left-hand side. They've embraced, Mary and, Martha and Jesus's mother have taken off Lazarus's windings and so forth. And then they open up this shot between Jesus and Lazarus's heads. You see Thomas in the background processing what just happened, what's going on. If Jesus can save Lazarus from death, why doesn't he bring back Rama? So it's really artistically, and there's a number of shots like this. I'm only showing a couple of examples. Thomas, Judas explains, or exclaims, I should say, "Oh, this is fantastic. Jesus' miracle of raising Lazarus is going to make him undeniable. Everybody's going to be unified. We're all going to join together, and, Jesus is going to come into his throne," and all this. Judas is just running wild with this idea. Right after he makes that speech, Thomas falls down to the ground in grief in front of Jesus because he just cannot process what's going on. He looks up at Jesus and he says, "Why? Why did you resurrect Lazarus, but not Rama? Why did John the Baptist die? It's sick," he says. "I can't understand it." And Jesus looks down at him, and then he ends up getting down on his knees with Thomas. And here's some of the here's Judas's dialogue. Okay, so I did put some of the dialogue here, so I'll be able to say it. Tired of all this soon talk. And John, the disciple who is Thomas's special friend, tries to calm him down. "Thomas, don't, not here." Thomas says, "Yes, right here. Rabbi, look me in the eyes." And Jesus says, "I am. I always will." "That's not an answer. Why him and not Rama? Why not your cousin John? This is sick." Then Jesus gets down on his knees and takes Thomas's head in his hands. And here's some of what I consider the really strong writing of this episode. He says, "Thomas, I don't expect you," well, I can't see the edge of the page, "to understand now. I don't. What the Father allows, what I allow in order to bring about my Father's will and the faith and the growth of his church, it can be crushing for you. And yes, even for me." And Thomas, still shattered, he says, "It's too much. It's too much. I don't understand." And Jesus says, "I know, and that hurts my heart. But please stay with me, Thomas, and you'll understand in time." So it doesn't provide an answer. Jesus doesn't give an answer, but he shows his witness, his desire to accompany Thomas through this journey. And he says it's also crushing for himself, what's happening, that he can't just instantly make everything all right for everybody on this earth. Boy, I would like to talk some more about what the Chosen does, and I can, if you want to, in the question and answer. This doesn't cure Thomas. He ends up throwing pottery against the wall that night. He's still not accepting and not settled or anything. But to me, it shows a very careful texturing and intentionality through the series, where they're able to look far ahead, develop a character with many touches over time, and put the character into a particular situation in which that character's added story that's not in the original Bible text amplifies something that is in the Bible text and allows him to interact with Jesus in a meaningful way. So that's what I'll end up saying about The Chosen at this time. Now let's move a little bit to Believe the Promise. So Believe the Promise is a musical. It has about 5 songs in each of the 5 episodes. There's 25 songs, I believe, in the full. Depending on how you count them, you can count some as 1 or 2. Yeah, I'm trying to find that page where I have these lyrics written down here. So this is a song uh, Welcome to the Grand Bazaar. Some of the songs are just fun. Uh, they dramatize the this is just the princess of Egypt who adopts Moses is there in the green being carried on a chair, and she's being taken to the Grand Bazaar to try and buy an amulet that will help her have a baby because her father wants her to have a baby so that he can have a successor to the throne. This is just a kind of a fun, kind of corny song like you might expect in a musical. There's a lot of fun rhyming in it. Um, Let me see if I can. Yeah, I put all the lyrics in my notes that go with the slide, but they're not showing here. I put a portion of the lyrics, I should say. Let me just stop sharing for a second and see if I can re-share with the lyrics showing. Well, actually, I'll just do it here with the draft non-presentation mode here. So, yeah, some of the fun songs in this musical are Welcome to the Grand Bazaar, We're the Daughters of Jethro, We've Got Trouble, which I'm going to say something about here in a minute. Yeah, this is just, I'll just say a little bit more about this. This is one of the quote unquote fun songs. It's in Act 5. I made the titles for these. They don't give the titles, so I'm taking what I would assume might be the title of the song, and I'm calling it We've Got Trouble. Pharaoh's courtiers gather around him and plead for him to recapture the Israelite slaves. This one slave, pardon me, one courtier here pulls out from under his robe these two things that are like maracas, and this is a Latin beat number, and so he's going around the courtroom shaking these things like maracas, and they're doing this kind of Latin dance step while they're singing this. And here's some of the lyrics to it. Have you noticed it's gone quiet? We fear a missing link. No one to entertain us or bring us food and drink. The destruction of the Hebrew God has really taken toll. Our goose is cooked, our lives kaput. It's all out of control. That's kind of the beginning verse, and then they go into the Latin beat. We realize you were stressed with all the locusts and the pests, and there's no way you could have been deceived. And Pharaoh says, no, never. But do you think you might have been a tad too hasty when you let those Hebrew slaves go up and leave? We've got trouble, because our slaves are up and gone. We've got trouble. Who's going to mow the lawn? And so they, kind of mix corny modern elements with the original. That might offend some people. Didn't offend me. I just thought it was fun. But it also illustrates a point that Pharaoh's courtiers really were around him. And, you get a good sense of how Pharaoh is relating to the loss of the Hebrews. Earlier in the play, now I'm talking about serious songs. There's some really good songs that juxtapose the basic decision that runs through the whole drama, 5 acts of, will I trust in God or will I be consumed by the world and what it offers? So this is one of the songs that dramatizes that choice. This is young young Moses in Pharaoh's court. And the song is called This is the Life. It's at the beginning of Act 2. And the princess here is introducing young Moses to all the glamour of his life and power of his life at court, and how everybody will love him and he'll have the best clothes and he's not going to be with those stupid Hebrews anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And Moses is facing temptation about that and has to decide whether he's going to stay true to God. Another song later that does a really good job with this, Pharaoh on the left is singing a song, I rule it all. And Moses is singing, he rules it all, about God. So you have a contrasting, a merge song, like Pharaoh's on one part of the stage and Moses is on another part of the stage. When they filmed it, they dissolve back and forth between the two of them. And I'll show you the way that works here in the next slide with the lyrics. Pharaoh is putting his armor on. He's getting ready to go chase after the escaped Israelites. He says, I'm Pharaoh. I'm the God above all gods. I can do anything. And then he sings, I've created wonders like statues and structures, and my palace with its strength in every wall. So they can't break me, cause me pain. It's my kingdom. I still reign. Nice try, but I rule it all. I rule it all. And then you'll see in the next slide, which has Moses's responding lyrics, God created wonders like waterfalls and thunder, tiny seeds that grow into trees so tall. By his power, the sun will rise and the moon adjusts its tide. It's clear to see that he rules it all. And then they both go into a duet. There's only one who it could be who holds the power over the earth and sea. And Moses saying, it's God, and Pharaoh saying, it's me. So there's some really clever songs that juxtapose the question of who's going to believe in themselves and their own powers and who's going to trust in God. And there are a number of occasions where that happens. There's a song earlier in the play where the princess sings about all the power that Moses is going to bring her in the court because now she has a son. Moses is singing about how he's got to follow God even though he's in the court, and they dissolve back and forth in a similar way to the song that I've just mentioned. It's very good writing. One of the things that some people don't like about Believe the Promise is they have all recorded sound ahead of time. So the actors are lip syncing and mouthing the words in the actual dramatic production. The music's all pre-recorded. Betty Whitehead explained to me why they do that for technical reasons. Plus, they have the people who do Adventures in Odyssey with professional actors recording all the voicings and the singing. So it's at a very high level. And the lip syncing is really quite good. You can watch it yourself and decide if it's for you or not. I'm personally fine with it. I liked it. So with a musical, the songs are very memorable. They stick in the memory. You know, they have rhyme, music, word combination. They can be detached from context and sung long after the camporee. They appeal to our emotions in a special way. There's certain things that a musical can do that a strictly dramatic presentation can't do in the same way, and vice versa. Songs can encapsulate core ideas, like I mentioned about This is the Life, and I rule it all, he rules it all. These songs crystallize a key concept of the camporee, God's sovereignty, trusting God's care versus self-glorification and ego. So wrapping up here so that we have some time for questions and discussion. Here are a couple of biblical adaptation protocols I would give. The adaptation must be good art in itself. Bad art for a good cause is not acceptable. These are some quotes from Flannery O'Connor from her book, Mystery and Manner. The writer's moral sense must coincide with his dramatic sense. It's the nature of fiction not to be good for much unless it's good for itself. Basically, these quotes are to support the idea that faith-affirming productions still need to be good productions in and of themselves. It doesn't excuse the writer from making a good production because they say it's faith-affirming. Years ago, I wrote a review of a novel, an Adventist novel published by either Review and Herald or Pacific Press, in which I criticized a number of elements of the writer's construction of this apocalyptic. It was an apocalyptic narrative, futuristic narrative. And like the character, there was a character who was brunette in one scene and blonde in another scene, and other improbable things and things that didn't fit together. And this was published in Adventist Review. And then the writer of the novel wrote a letter to the editor of Adventist Review saying, well, I'm not aiming to be a high literary author. If my novel provided some faith injection or something to people, that's good enough for me. I don't care about the literary aspect of it. And so that kind of illustrates the flip side of what I'm saying is that, you know, both these productions I think are very high quality artistic wise, and they're high quality faith affirming wise. So I think that's what we want to shoot for. And what we do must work with the original text. We can add things, pardon me, I put here we can add things. It should say can't add things. Let me just change that right now so that nobody misunderstands. And since I'm in draft mode, I can do that. We can't add things that contradict the spirit of the original. For instance, The Last Temptation of Christ, and other productions you can think of probably add some things that we would consider counter-biblical. And that is a real problem. Okay, so a few questions. For those of you who've watched The Chosen or Believe the Promise, do you have any comments on those as biblically based adaptations? Are there other biblically based adaptations that you think are particularly interesting or worthwhile? And are there additional challenges to making BBAs, as I call them, that you might want to raise for the group here? Thank you for your attention, and sorry for a rushed and drafty presentation, but thank you for letting me try it out on you.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I quite enjoyed it. And in terms of it's being drafty, that's the purpose of these particular sessions, that we all have things that we're working on, and we just want to sort of express them, work them out, perhaps through discussion in the group. So let me just say right off the bat, I'm just very inspired by your presentation. I love The Chosen. I've not seen Believe the Promise, but I love The Chosen. I think because of the way it humanizes not just Christ, but also the disciples, and gives us a plausible backstories for them, right? Because we don't always know their backstory, but I mean, like Matthew comes across as what is it? As, I guess, autistic.
Right.
Um, so I mean, and we're like, hey, that makes sense. That's why he was so fascinated with numbers, and he had all these exact details, and et cetera, et cetera. So I really appreciate your particular work, and it inspires me to kind of go back and watch the episodes that I have watched already, and then catch up, because I'm way behind, and you gave me a whole bunch of spoilers that I'm not too pleased about, but that's okay. I'll forgive you. But does anyone have any questions or comments for Scott, and you might want to address some of the questions he raises here? You can either just unmute and speak. Mhm. Yes, I see you, Laura. Mhm.
Thank
Laura?
you. Thank you, Scott. This was so enjoyable. Thank you for bringing English thinking skills to something that I've enjoyed kind of in a casual way. It was really fun to see you bringing our discipline to thinking about The Chosen. That's the one I've seen. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the other. One, you asked for kind of personal responses to what we've seen. Something that I've enjoyed, but also kind of wanted to think more deeply about with The Chosen is two things. One, a lot of scenes where the disciples are only involved with each other. And I sometimes, as a viewer, would find myself like, where's Jesus? Is he going to come before the end of So I'm curious, number one, about that, and your thinking about what they're doing with those protracted scenes without Jesus. And then secondly, the portrayal of Jesus with children. I remember a particular scene where I think it's before he starts the ministry, and he's kind of out alone, and these children come and spend several days with him, and he has
Yeah, it's
them working with
episode
him as
3
a
of season
carpenter.
1. There's a
There
whole
you go.
episode
There you go.
dedicated to that.
Yeah. So I just wonder, those two areas, Jesus and children, and the amount of time disciples are without Jesus in the show.
Well, my take on the second question first, on the time. Jesus is the star attraction, right, for the show. And I think it's important for him to be off screen for a certain portion of each show, for you to have a strong desire to see him come on the scene. So I think it creates real strong, at least with me, real strong viewer appetite to see him. Also, I think in the context of the Bible, the disciples probably weren't always with Jesus. This shows them, like they go to Capernaum, everybody goes home to their own house for a while, or then they get back together and they head off on a trip to, through Samaria or to Jerusalem, be what, or to Bethany, whatever it happens to be. So I think it's realistic. I think it's also good for us to see what are the disciples like when Jesus isn't there managing them. I think, we see that, in the Bible text itself, it talks about how they get on into arguments about who's going to be the greatest and other stuff like that. So I think, that's a real part. The focus of the Gospels is on Jesus, but I think The Chosen adds some more about the disciples in their own personal home lives. Like Chandra was saying earlier, gives them backstories, plausible backstories, which I think really helps us to get more engaged with the disciples and then go back to see what's actually in the Bible. But I think, for the most part, everything is really conversant with what is actually there. Did I leave out anything, or is there something else you wanted me to say?
Just
Oh, with the
Jesus and children. I
children.
wondered what you thought was behind. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I thought that was an awesome episode. I mean, Jesus kind of tests out some things with the children. You see how kind he is, how caring he is about the children. They have two really cute child actors who are the main people who interact with Jesus. And just, I think it creates a winsomeness about Jesus, and it gives us a chance to see Jesus with a sort of group of junior league disciples before he gets the adults. And because these two kids that come to see him bring more kids. Well, there's just first this girl, and then she brings her friend, and then they bring a bunch of other friends. They all crowd around Jesus. So you kind of see a precursor of what Jesus's world is going to be like with the disciples, except the children just totally trust in him, love him, and the disciples, have all these adult things going on. So you get to see the different dynamic between Jesus with the children group and the adult group.
Great answer. Thank you, Scott.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Scott, there seems to be no other questions or comments. Do you have anything more you'd like to share? We have about 7 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that film can do especially well, and that is the special province of film, is to take a story and break it apart into different atoms, and then to reassemble those atoms into a compelling package. Film, as opposed to theater, can place the audience at all different distances to the actual action that's being shown, whether it's close up, medium shot, full shot, long shot, extreme long shot. So we have extreme long shots of the disciples walking across a mountainous or deserty landscape. We have those really long shots. We have full shots where you see all the disciples around a table. We have two shots where, like, Jesus is with Mary or Martha or Lazarus or somebody else. And then we have the close-ups that show Jesus's face, and the actor who portrays Jesus is able to show a variety of emotions, humor, sadness, grief, seriousness, commandship, like when he raises his hand and says, "Lazarus, come forth." I don't know, if I were dead, I would respond to that voice. I mean, it's a strong voice. And so I think the ability of film to break up a story into all these different distances, angles, and lighting allows it to tell the story to us in an already highly interpreted way that we can follow a certain through line. Like the whole thing about Thomas and how he's always in the background of all this stuff that's happening with the resurrection of Lazarus. Film really can break that down and show it with different shots in a compelling way. Musical theater, on the other hand, you're always seeing this big, broad view. And like I mentioned earlier, the songs are very catchy. The writing's very fun. It's very engaging, but you experience it in a different way than film. Although when you watch the video of it, they do have some medium shots and close-ups so that you're getting kind of a combined experience of both live theater and recorded theater, and both cinema and theater. So I think both of the one of the things that compelled me about both of these productions is the more I studied each of them, the more I liked them. I think that's a sign of a good literary work. There's a lot there to dig into,
That's
and
true.
I'm just scratching the surface. And when you study, and the more you study it, the more you see how the artistic choices that were made and all the richness that's there. And that's something I really enjoyed in preparing this project.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I was just thinking as you
Can
were
I interject
speaking.
one more?
Sure. No, go right ahead.
So sorry. No, please.
No, you're fine.
Go ahead, Chandra, after you.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're
You
fine.
sure? I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Really, really quickly, I can't resist asking this group if they can help me remember a title. So talking about biblically based adaptations, I remember as a young academy student back east in North Carolina in the 80s, reading a book that was it was like a series of short stories, each focused on a different disciple. And the story would start with before the disciple met Jesus. Then there was a little gap in the page, and then it went to their life after Jesus. Jesus wasn't part of it, but it was this before and after. And as a young teenager, I remember being both really spiritually fed by that book and also as a baby future English major, really intrigued by how the adaptation process worked. But I've never been able to find that book subsequently. Does anyone on this call recognize that book?
I do not recall it.
Okay.
I don't, but
would
I
love to find it.
Googled while you were talking, I Googled a few. There's 12 Ordinary Men by John MacArthur. There's one by Douglas Connolly, The 12 Disciples. And another one, this one looks more recent though, but They Walked with God. Oh, but
Okay. Yeah,
there's
I
one
haven't
more
Googled it
that
recently. I'll try. Yeah.
could be the biographies of Jesus's apostles. This one has an
Hmm.
older date. It looks like it, but it seems like it might be the MacArthur book or either the Mosley, since you said it was when you were in
In the
academy.
80s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for looking. I'll try to track those. Thank you, Chandra. Please. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just gonna make, while you were speaking, Scott, I thought about the Ten Commandments, and what's that, about 30 at 40? I don't know, how old is the Ten Commandments? About 40 years old now? The Charleston Heston version.
Yeah, so I think it's
It's
1951 or
oh
something.
wow, it's that old.
It's way back there. It's on my list of
Yeah.
earlier in the presentation, but
Yeah, it's I was just thinking about how far we have come, because how does that stack up against something like The Chosen? I mean, it's
so David and Bathsheba, the Ten Commandments, they always have like this seductress woman,
yes.
temptress in those ones. And so I think in the portrayal of women as rational, reasonable characters, and they have some love interest between Rama and Thomas in this episode, but there's a much more mature approach to the Bible, and it's not The Chosen is not spectacle based. In those films, the Cecil B. DeMille era, it's all spectacle, which is exciting, but I like the human drama that's shown in The Chosen better.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions?
There's
Or
a comment in the chat from Laura.
Oh,
It's
yes.
it's not a question, but it's a comment. But he can
Thank you, Dr.
probably.
Wilkerson.
Just words
Oh, it's
of appreciation to Scott. Thank you so much.
yes.
Hey, thank you to all of you.
Yes, wonderful presentation. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Dr. Wilkerson, do you mind closing us out in prayer?
Sure, no problem. And Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the presentation today and for the attendance. We definitely appreciate the discussion about the adaptations and the the encouragement that it gives us to continue to read our Bible and to learn more about those things that we are unsure of and those things that we need more information about. Definitely bless all the creative minds that are in attendance today, and we hope that we will continue to present in your name and glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
And amen. And before you leave, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that two questions came in via text by our student who might be a little hesitant and shy amongst all of these professors. So here are your questions, and maybe Scott, I can if no one if the rest of you don't have time, you can leave and then Scott can converse. Do you believe that it is necessary in an adaptation to retain the literary themes of the original work? Or do you think that the examination of a moment in a story, biblical, historical, or otherwise, from another perspective is necessary to adaptation? If so, how do you think this helps adaptation as a medium? And for example, how the episode of The Chosen with Lazarus refocuses parts of the narrative from the joy of Lazarus's resurrection onto the sorrow of Thomas? Did you get all of that?
Yeah, well, I think I got the gist of it.
Okay.
So I'll take a shot at it. There's adaptations that are what we might call small adaptations that hew close to the text and add a few things. And then there's adaptations that take a little piece of the text and add a bunch of other stuff. Like when I was a kid, Swift Arrow was a big novel among Adventists, this Indian story by Josephine Cunnington Edwards. And I think Josephine Cunnington Edwards had, I think she even said something about this. She had a few lines of information about this story about somebody who was in Indian capture and then released years later. So she might have had a paragraph to work with, and she wrote a novel about it. So obviously, that's 2% historical grounding and 98% author's imagination. And then there's other works that try and be very literal, but are still, making little departures from the text. So I think there's room for different levels of closeness to the original text, whether you're trying to, like the story that Laura was mentioning, where you have a section about the disciples' lives before they met Jesus and then after Jesus was gone. Well, of course, those are the two parts that are not mainly covered in the Bible narrative. So it's still based on something that's not actually in the text, but it's the before and after of that, writing a prequel and a sequel, if you will. So I think there's different ways of creating legitimate interpretations that are closer or farther from the text, having more created elements, less created elements, but you could still apply those rules. It has to comport with, like, I don't know, biblical truth as we know it, or at least as the author interprets it. People are going to have different ideas about that, but I think the author should be obviously trying to portray it as they feel the spiritual message of the original is.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. He said thank you.
All right. I
Thank
gave it my best shot.
So thank you all so much. And be sure to join us next month. I think we'll be having a discussion, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Kim Roper will be talking about AI and its impact on the classroom. So, and she'll be giving us some tools to work with. So thank you, and have a great evening, all of you. Bye. Thank you again, Scott. Wonderful presentation.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you
Scott.
all.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, Dr. Ford.